buildings and, or sitting in the middle of an airport or something like that. And it's really been, there's been quite a big campaign built up through direct action, actually. But that idea of doing protests like that in Hong Kong is beyond the imagination, unfortunately, of a lot of people in the democracy movement. And as an activist, I can, just as an observer, in some ways it's frustrating that the mentality in Hong Kong, because obviously there is a rule of law and a constitution which gives you some protection. And if a group of people sat on a building in Hong Kong, you wouldn't get in much trouble, I can tell you that. It's if you think about it, it's not actually a crime at all, is it, actually, sitting on the roof of a building? What's your take on it, and why a lot of Hong Kong people would be they'd be afraid to do it?
Well, I think in Hong Kong, I think a lot of people would explain because we got the British education, so we are a little bit high class. But then when you think back, we are looking at what's happening in Britain, so this kind of explanation doesn't really explain the thing. But if you look at China, like in Chinese culture, is it that people always obey what's going on in the government or in politics? Not really. But why do they never do this kind of protest in Hong Kong? I think it kinds of related to what we have been discussing about the pressure that we are afraid of what's going to happen to ourselves because of the Communist Party in China, and because of this kind of news that might happen to us, being dragged into a car and then sent to Shenzhen, right? So if this kind of news keeps on coming out, I think it creates a kind of threat to people that please don't do anything silly. This kind of message.
I suggest some Hong Kong people could see the directors, one of the documentary directors movie, Michael Moore. When his concept about it is the government is making fear to you, especially throughout the news, throughout everything.
Right.
So when the fears come up to you, and then suddenly you have your own self-censorship,
right,
and then suddenly become very docile. Suddenly become very you will just control yourself, right? Yeah, and freer from the heart. But actually, maybe the things is totally different,
Yeah, some scholars actually in Japan talks about the crime rate and what people, those news stations actually reports in their news program. They in Japan recently, they say there are more people being jailed, sentenced to death penalty, is it? Because of some kind of crimes. But actually, while they are creating this kind of fear, when we look at figures, there was actually a Greenpeace spokesman actually tells the student that the crime rate has been dropping from 1970s to recent years. It's actually a big drop in crime rates. But then what we were hearing about those news on the TV, it's always about crime rates, crime about all around us. And it kind of create a kind of fear that we need more kind of punishment to people, so to make you safe. This kind of news actually creates fear to people, and it becomes a tool of the government to control people's mind. So I think what Ken said was absolutely right, and it's happening.
I mean, talking of Japan, connected to that, I mean, I was a few weeks ago, I was checking out on Wikipedia some of the politics in Japan in the 1960s and 1970s, and some of the activist groups. And Japan has got quite a history of some quite radical action, haven't it, by different activist groups. Do you remember there was was a group called the Red Army.
Yeah.
And anyone who's interested should check them out actually on Wikipedia, because they did some very radical stuff actually. I mean, this is absolutely true. There was a group of these guys in the 1970s who hijacked an aeroplane and flew it from one country to the other, and it was to do with, they did it, just remember this is Japanese people, they were doing it to support the cause in Palestine. Okay, so it was the politics involved. It was to do with the Middle East, but they did this. I mean, the idea of hijacking airplanes is an extremely radical thing to do, but it actually happened. But obviously nowadays Japanese politics, and you never hear of anything radical like that happening, and
not even a lot of protests. Like there are some small protests, but not like comparing to what happened in Japan in the 1960s and 1970s. It's absolutely like just a small thing. So there's quite a big change in how people look at politics in Japan right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny quite how it goes in waves like that. Why, I don't quite know. It'd be interesting to do some research and study about why there was sort of some radical stuff going on in the 60s and 70s in Japan, but now it seems quite a timid,
maybe we can talk about that
place.
Next time when we are in the show again.
Yeah, we'll have to do it, because obviously you're a bit of a Japanese expert, having lived there and studied there for a bit, so we'll have to compare a bit, I think.
Sure.
Going back to this project, I did notice that Greenpeace also have got a bit of a history of quite radical direct action, actually. Because and even in Hong Kong, now and again, they do stuff, actually. Do you remember they climbed the Legco building and put a big banner?
It was the government headquarters.
Calling Donald a climate criminal.
Yes.
And so they only got a small fine for that. So now and again, I mean, Greenpeace are interesting, aren't they, as an organisation? People in their minds, they see them as quite mainstream in some ways, and they're willing to donate, money to them. But in terms of their action, it is quite radical, actually, in some of what they do. But obviously, they have a big emphasis that whatever they do, it's got to be completely peaceful. And as long as it's peaceful, you can do, it's surprising what you can do, actually. And it's just sometimes it's the amount of imagination, I think. When you have an idea, it can be scary to even think about. But, when you watch a clip of some of what Greenpeace do, you can see what they actually do in reality. It can play out quite well, I think, as long as you're completely peaceful, actually.
Yeah. So do you think next time Albert Longhair and Raymond should sit on the table? or just if they stand up on the table, so do you think they need the ladder to take them down, or they pull them down? Something like that.
I mean, because obviously what goes on inside the legislative chamber is very, very different to what actually happens outside actually, and the law views it totally differently, and the media will view it totally differently. So if for example in the legislative chamber you throw a paper aeroplane at someone, it's a massive thing, and it's extremely controversial. But the idea of outside the Legislative Council in the street, you just throw a paper aeroplane at someone, it would...
No, that's criminal, because they charge you $1,500 fine. It's not a private place that you throw an aeroplane in the Legco. You have got to take it to the court.
And I mean, as an activist, and you have to be fully aware of quite how it works, and why it is, in a funny way, it shouldn't be different, actually. But for some reason, the way things are, it just does work out that things are different, and obviously, the LSD lawmakers are fully aware of that, actually, and they are thinking, what they can do to form the biggest possible protest, within acceptable limits of of the democracy movement and their supporters and so on. But obviously, always there are new ways of protesting and things, I think. But it was interesting to see what Longhair did actually, because if you just lie on the ground totally peacefully and you refuse to move and you get carried out, that is a form of protest, a legitimate protest, totally non-violent.
But the pro-government newspaper